Let's take a closer look at the history of the legendary quattro all-wheel drive system. Usually, quattro explanations start in the 1970s, but to understand the whole story we have to go back to the 1930s. At the end of 1935, the Auto Union in Chemnitz decided to develop a competitor for the upcoming and heavily subsidized Beetle, the DKW F9. Within the Auto Union group, DKW was responsible for reasonably priced smaller cars, and they were already known for front-wheel drive. Until then, they built cars with a wooden frame and transversely mounted two-cylinder two-stroke engines. The biggest motorcycle engine back in the day, and the concept which would result in the Trabant after the war, and the transversal drivetrain we find in every hatchback today. Learn all about that in my Trabant video series, where I also restored my own Trabant, which you can rent and experience yourself. So, to compete with the upcoming VW Beetle, a two-cylinder engine was not enough anymore, and they needed 3 cylinders. They couldn't mount the longer engine transversely anymore, and also wanted to have a proper gearbox instead of a motorcycle box with a chain. And so, they tried to find a good drivetrain package for a longitudinal engine, which sits close to the driven axle. They found it in their motorsport department, at the Auto Union Grand Prix car. A mid-engined race car with a gearbox hanging behind the driven axle, a Porsche design. So they used this exact package at the front axle of the DKW F9, and it was coincidentally exactly the reverse design of the VW Beetle, also a Porsche design. And that's the reason why today a Porsche 911 drivetrain looks like a reversed Audi. You can learn all details about this story and how the DKW F9 is influencing the car world until today in my video series, where I also restore my own F9. But back to the 1930s. So the Auto Union developed the F9, their masterpiece with all their latest innovations and for the lowest possible price to be able to compete with the Beetle. Production was scheduled for 1940. But because of the Second World War, the production of the civil vehicle was prohibited. Vice President of the Auto Union at that time was Karl Hahn, and he offered to the German military in 1941 to develop an all-wheel drive version of the DKW F9. That was relatively simple because of the F9's drivetrain package. The gearbox and its output shaft were easy to reach, and a prop shaft to the rear axle could be connected with a dog clutch, so you could choose between front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive. Hahn's intention here, to offer an all-wheel drive version of the F9, was mainly to be allowed to develop the F9 further during the war, to have a competitive mass production car once the war is over. But this development never happened. The army wasn't interested, also because of the F9's two-stroke engine. So further development on the F9 was not allowed during the war, but still happened, as you can learn in my video series. At the end of the war, the American army was in Chemnitz and Zwickau, the main locations of the Auto Union. When it became clear that this area will become Russian occupation zone, many Auto Union employees fled to the American sector, to Ingolstadt. Also Auto Union's President Richard Brun and Vice President Karl Hahn. They started the new Auto Union company in Ingolstadt, including the former factory in Düsseldorf. They took many blueprints with them, but not all of them, and they didn't have the machines and equipment to build the F9 as it was designed before the war. So from 1950, the new West German Auto Union first produced the F9 body with the F8 two-cylinder engine, hence called it DKW F9. It took them until 1953 to produce the F9 with the intended 3-cylinder two-stroke engine. In the meantime, in 1950, West German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer discussed the possibility for West Germany to contribute to its inner security, instead of just relying on Allied forces. In other words, to build a new German army. To organize these efforts, in October 1950, they founded the German Department to Support Allied Forces, led by Theodor Blank, and hence called Department Blank. This department discussed and planned the structure of a new German army, and in the background, the VDA, the Union of German Car Manufacturers, already checked with German car manufacturers who could be willing to contribute for producing a new standard light vehicle for the German army. Alternatives at that time were licensed productions of the British Land Rovers and American Jeeps. but Germany wanted to produce their own new standard military vehicle. Now, the new West German Auto Union became the go-to place for all previous staff who didn't want to stay in the Russian sector. One of them was Walter Schmidt, a lawyer who worked for the Auto Union before and during the Second World War and was the key contact between the Heereswaffenamt and the development departments in Chemnitz. So he always stayed up to date for state projects, coordinated and secured new military car projects for the Auto Union during the war. After the war, he first worked as a lawyer on his own and joined the newly founded West German Auto Union in 1949 in the same position as before. He was now, again, the key contact between the Auto Union and the state institution Department Blank, which also had many of the previous employees in the same positions as before the war. So Schmidt could use his old contacts again to get some insights into upcoming state projects, which would provide a reliable revenue for the newly founded New Old Car manufacturer. Already in March 1952, Schmidt had a conversation with Colonel Freyer of the Department Blank about designing a new German light military vehicle with all-wheel drive, although politically Germany was ordered to produce Land Rovers and Jeeps in license. Schmidt declared the young Auto Union would be open for anything. They would produce Allied vehicles in license or develop a new vehicle. Because of that offer, the Auto Union was at the top of the list for new German army vehicles, and a group of officials visited their factory in Düsseldorf in October 1952. Here, they said they would prefer to have a light vehicle with three-cylinder engine and all-wheel drive. Karl Hahn, vice president of Auto Union now again, immediately responded that he already offered that in 1941, so 11 years earlier, and that the DKW F9 is actually prepared to have all-wheel drive, which in fact it was not. Until then, they never developed the all-wheel drive version of the F9, and also they didn't even have the three-cylinder engine yet in West Germany. Prototypes and blueprints of the new engine stayed in East Germany, and by the way, my F9 is one of these early 1950s East German F9s with the new three-cylinder engine. In Ingolstadt, they only had the old two-cylinder. In February 1953, a show event was planned in Hangela, where the German car industry should show their concepts to state officials. The Auto Union presented their Schnelllaster, a van with two-cylinder engine, and they presented a long-wheelbase DKW F91 convertible with 4 doors. The funny thing was, this car neither had all-wheel drive nor the new three-cylinder engine, although they claimed that. But who looks underneath the cover at a car show? It had just the two-cylinder engine and front-wheel drive, hence even the name F91 was confusing. Anyway, the state officials were still impressed and wanted the all-wheel drive convertible for police and border patrol. Now the Auto Union was in the game. Additionally, because they couldn't build a prototype fast enough, they presented first blueprints for an off-road vehicle. In the meantime, the state office changed their requirements multiple times. And that was no surprise. They had the same institutions with the same people in the same positions and hence the same situation like during the war. And just like during the war, state requirements for vehicles were constantly changing and manufacturers had to adapt. Instead of wanting a small three-cylinder engine, they now, just a few weeks later, preferred an air-cooled diesel engine, but soon after dropped that thought. They then wanted a larger, heavier vehicle, but quickly changed back to the original light vehicle. They suddenly wanted the vehicle to swim, but also that was dropped shortly after. And this not ideal communication between state institutions and manufacturers is something we even know from my Zeppelin video series. Auto Union, with their experienced lobbyist Walter Schmidt, already knew the game, and they stick to their original plan. From now on, every few months there was a drive event for state officials for the latest developments. Already in March 1953, the Auto Union could provide a DKW F91 convertible, now with the first three-cylinder engine, but still without all-wheel drive. The car did well in the test, although the missing all-wheel drive, as previously promised, and the not sufficient ground clearance were criticized. A few days later, on 7th of March 1953, the first meeting to develop an all-wheel drive off-road vehicle for the German military was held in Ingolstadt. Internally, the project was called M-Wagen. Auto Union assigned this project to many of their off-road experienced engineers from war times. For example, overall responsibility had Karl Jenschke, who was responsible for the Adler V40T, a light all-wheel drive vehicle which was designed for the German Luftwaffe during the war but didn't make it to production. And Werner Geite was head of the off-road testing department, who was in the same position for the Horch military cars during the war. So they took the DKW F9 design, shortened the wheelbase, and used the front axle also for the rear, so suspension parts are the same all around. They used the water-cooled 900cc 3-cylinder 2-stroke engine with 34 horsepower, and connected the rear axle through a dog clutch, just like Hahn suggested it in 1941. So this vehicle could either drive with front-wheel drive or with all-wheel drive without a central diff and with no locking diffs. They built first prototypes with simple steel body, split window and fuel flap on the right-hand side. In October 1953, they handed over the first 2 prototypes to the department Blank, which tested them for 2 months. Parallel to that, the Auto Union did their first own internal tests. General feedback was good, but there were many small problems, which mostly had to do with the bodywork. Auto Union lobbyist Schmidt organized that Colonel Freyer could already test drive the car 2 days before the official presentation date. And here, overall feedback was good, but there was a list of things to improve. The wishbones were hanging too low. The front muffler was too low. The fuel tank was placed underneath the front seats, which should have been moved to the back. And the gear ratios were too long. And again, here was this endless ping-pong game between institutions. Because of the required updates, Department Blank instructed Auto Union not to present the car at the next event. Experienced lobbyist Schmidt instead organized that the off-road car was presented already shortly after to the head of the technical department of the German border force, who was impressed by the car. And because he was impressed, other institutions reconsidered again. So Auto Union always used all tricks to stay in the game. So Ingolstadt quickly improved the car. Wishbones had a bent shape for better ground clearance, fuel tank went to the rear, exhaust was sitting higher. Other points were that officials didn't like the shifter at the steering wheel. They wanted a tougher body, a foldable windscreen, a carburetor for more extreme angles, and linkage for the roof. Also, the State Department even demanded to receive technical drawings to correct them. Anyway, Auto Union didn't do that and finished the second version of their off-road car in autumn 1953 with all demanded updates. In November 1953, there was the next driving test with state officials in Mürlenbach near the Nürburgring. Lobbyist Schmidt could get in touch with the local mayor beforehand and organized a secret test drive with Auto Union's test driver on the track 1 day before the presentation, so they could prepare better. Still, during the event, the car got stuck in an 80-centimeter ditch and could impress officials with how easily 2 soldiers could get it out of there. In December 1953, the first top bodywork was ready, and officials were very happy with it. So much so that they discussed using alternative materials like aluminium and plastic for it. The Auto Union confirmed that they were already working on alternative bodywork materials since the 1930s, so they are very experienced in that. Which, by the way, is also the reason for the Trabant's Duroplast body. Now, with the tub-like bodywork, the car looked very similar to the Adler V40T, which was no surprise. Just with the DKW F9 concept with the longitudinal engine in front of the front axle, the front overhang was much longer. In the meantime, 5 new prototypes should have been built. 1 with a steel tub bodywork, 2 with aluminium, and 2 with a plastic tub bodywork. But CEO Richard Brun cancelled 2 of the 5 prototypes because they didn't have the money for it. And the State Department denied any payment of the so far development because they didn't want to pay one manufacturer before they definitely decided for one car. So they only produced 3 prototypes, 1 with each material. So like always, the Auto Union was with their back against the wall and needed to develop the car quicker with even less prototypes. And unfortunately, the 1 prototype with aluminium body was crushed by a tank during a test in Grafenwöhr. Additionally, there were problems coming up within the German institutions. The German border force now ordered Land Rovers, which were produced and licensed at the German carmaker Tempo. The head of the border force didn't want other institutions to get a better car than the one he just ordered, and hence demanded self-locking differentials for the Auto Union off-road car, although his Land Rovers didn't have them either. It was just a strategy to add complexity and costs. But again, the Auto Union with their experienced lobbyist Walter Schmidt didn't get distracted and stick to their plan. But now, suddenly, there was new competition. Magirus put a Deutz diesel into an American Jeep. Porsche came with the 957, and Goliath, a Borgward brand, came with the Type 31. German officials were not a fan of in-license produced Allied cars, and again, with the Porsche we could see the exact reverse drivetrain to the Auto Union M car, with connectable front axle. The Goliath had a very similar concept to the M car, with a connectable rear axle, but just 2 cylinders, not enough ground clearance, lost parts during the test drives, got stuck very often and was towed away by the Auto Union M car. Porsche and Goliath could often not provide cars in time, while DKW could. Schmidt organized some impressive performances. For example, he let 2 mechanics swap the M car's engine to any DKW engine from a local dealer within just 1 hour, while just changing the Porsche's brake drum required a number of special tools and more than 2 hours. The Auto Union's problem was always a lack of power. They designed a 1000cc engine, but they didn't have the money to produce it quickly enough, so tests were always done with the smaller 900cc engine, and they tried to increase torque with a shorter gear ratio. Officials demanded the off-road vehicle to only have 2 sticks, so soldiers wouldn't accidentally use the wrong one and get stuck. The M car had 1 gear shifter in the middle, and 1 to connect the rear axle. For a lower gear ratio, they now needed to decide if they want just a shorter first gear and keep the connectable rear axle, or if they design a reduction gear for all gears, which required 1 stick, and hence get rid of the connectable rear axle, and always drive with 4-wheel drive. They decided for the latter. So they designed a reduction gear which could be connected with a stick, and the car now had permanent all-wheel drive. The M car with plastic bodywork was 53 kg lighter, but had problems with cracks after more than 30,000 kilometers of hard off-road testing. And here the ping-pong game started again. First, officials were happy about the plastic bodywork. Then, Auto Union wanted to produce only prototypes with plastic bodywork. And then officials rejected that thought and demanded steel bodywork again. This went on for a couple of times. For the Auto Union, the tools for plastic panel production would have been much cheaper, but the material was more expensive, so the overall cost was very similar. Now that the Department Blank demanded a steel body, Porsche had to go to Kamann in Osnabrück to build their steel body, which costed them 235,000 D-Mark. The Auto Union could do this in-house for half the price. So since the plastic bodywork was now gone, also Auto Union's CTO Robert Eberan von Eberhorst, who mainly supported this development, had to go. By the way, this is the man who designed the Auto Union Type D, Cisitalia 360 and was head engineer of ERA and Aston Martin in the UK after the war. So now, the M car development was mostly finished. The official name first was DKW F9 so the car it's based off with 4-wheel drive. Later, in 1962, it was called Munga. The Munga was extremely robust, very popular and used by German, Dutch and French forces until the 1970s. A problem was always the weak 3-cylinder engine. The 1000cc version with 44 horsepower was introduced in 1958, but still not powerful enough for this around 1200 kg heavy vehicle. This could have been solved by a V6 2-stroke engine with 84 horsepower, which was designed by former Auto Union engineer Hans Müller. But the German military wasn't interested in updating the Munga and instead wanted a new standard car. And in the meantime, Mercedes bought Auto Union and did not allow any further 2-stroke development. Check out my other videos for more info on that. First, they wanted to produce the Munga in Düsseldorf due to the bigger distance to the eastern border during the Cold War. In the end, they decided to produce it in Ingolstadt because of free capacities due to the plummeting motorcycle business. So the Munga was an important project for the young West German Auto Union company. It cost them lots of time and money to develop the car at first, but it provided a state contract for many years and secured good profits. They used all of their experienced employees from old Auto Union days and state connections to secure this contract. They worked with all tricks and could develop the Munga further and further to a solid and reliable car. Also, it picked up the good DKW F9 basis and turned it into a capable all-wheel drive vehicle, which would prove to be a great foundation for the future. I hope you liked this insight and check out my other videos for more detailed car history. See you at the next one.